There is a place in Scotland called the Highlands, and there is a story that has been told there for generations about red deer. When a stag grows old and feels the end coming, it is said to walk alone to a high place, lie down facing the sunrise, and wait. People who have spent their lives with animals, farmers, hunters, wildlife researchers, veterinarians, often describe something similar. The old dog that quietly separates itself from the family and finds a corner. The elephant that stops eating and stands motionless while the herd moves around it. The cat that disappears for days and is found later in a hidden place. Every culture on Earth has stories like this. Animals going somewhere alone when the end is near. Animals behaving differently in their final days in ways that seem to suggest they know something is happening. But is this actually true? Do animals have any awareness that they are dying? Do they understand death the way humans understand it? And if they do, what does that mean about the nature of consciousness, awareness, and what it feels like to be alive in a body that is shutting down? These are some of the most uncomfortable and fascinating questions in all of animal science, and the honest answer is far more complex than most people expect. The first thing to understand is that death awareness is not a single thing. It is a spectrum of different cognitive and biological processes, and different animals sit at very different points on that spectrum. At the most basic level, every living creature has biological systems that respond to the approach of death. Pain signals, organ failure, hormonal changes, neurological disruption. These physical processes affect behavior in ways that look, from the outside, like the animal knows something is wrong, even when no conscious awareness is involved at all. A fish that sinks to the bottom of a tank and lies on its side is not making a decision. Its body is failing, and gravity is doing the rest. But the more complex the animal, the harder it becomes to draw a clean line between biological response and something that might deserve to be called awareness. Elephants are where most serious researchers start when discussing animal death awareness, because the evidence is so extensive and so difficult to explain away. Elephants do something that no other non-human animal does, with anything close to the same consistency and complexity. They respond to the bodies and bones of dead elephants in ways that are qualitatively different from how they respond to any other object in their environment. When an elephant encounters the bones of another elephant, it will often stop, approach slowly, and spend extended time touching the bones with its trunk and feet, sometimes for hours. This happens even with the bones of elephants the living animal never knew in life. It happens with the bones of elephants from different family groups. Something about elephant remains specifically triggers a response in living elephants that researchers have described as resembling mourning, though that word carries assumptions that are difficult to verify. What is not difficult to verify is that the behavior is real, consistent, and unique to elephant remains. Elephants do not do this with the bones of other species. They are not simply investigating an unfamiliar object. They are responding to something specifically and differently. And whatever that response involves at the cognitive level, it requires some form of recognition that what they are encountering is related to death. Within elephant families, the behavior around dying and recently dead group members is even more striking. When an elephant is dying, the family group often stays close, touching the dying individual, attempting to lift it, sometimes making sounds that researchers describe as distress calls. After death, the group may remain near the body for days, returning to it repeatedly, covering it with branches and dirt in behavior that looks remarkably like burial. Calves have been observed returning to the bodies of their mothers repeatedly over multiple days. Mothers have been observed carrying dead calves for extended periods, behavior that appears in chimpanzees as well, refusing to put them down even as decomposition begins. These behaviors are not easy to explain purely in terms of biological reflex or conditioned response. They require us to at least consider the possibility that something is being experienced, that there is some form of awareness driving the behavior, even if we cannot know its exact nature. Chimpanzees, our closest living relatives, provide some of the most compelling evidence that death awareness exists in non-human animals at a meaningful cognitive level. In multiple observed cases, chimpanzees have been documented behaving in ways that suggest they understand, at least partially, that a dead group member is not simply sleeping or absent. They have been seen attempting to revive dead individuals through grooming, poking, and calling. They have been observed maintaining unusual silence around dead group members, which stands out against the normally loud social environment of chimpanzee groups. In one famous case documented by primatologist Jane Goodall, a young chimpanzee named Flint died within weeks of his mother Flo's death, appearing to lose the will to eat or move after her loss, sitting at the place where she had died and gradually fading. Whether this constitutes grief in the way humans experience it is something researchers argue about intensely, but something happened to Flint after Flo died, something that changed his behavior in ways that directly led to his own death. Whatever that was, It was not nothing. There is also research suggesting that some animals have a specific biological response to the smell of death that goes beyond simple aversion. Many mammals have been found to produce chemicals at or near the point of death that other members of their species can detect and respond to. Social insects like ants and bees produce what researchers call death chemicals, compounds released after death that trigger immediate removal behavior in other colony members. More relevantly for our purposes, some mammals appear to produce or release compounds as their bodies begin to shut down that may signal to other animals in the group that something is changing. Whether this constitutes a warning system, a social signal, or simply a biological byproduct of dying is not fully understood, but it raises the possibility that in tightly bonded animal groups, the approach of death in one individual may be detectable by others at a chemical level that precedes any behavioral or visible sign of decline. Dogs deserve their own discussion here because the evidence from domestic dogs is both extensive and very close to home for most people. Veterinarians and animal hospice workers consistently report that dogs in the final stages of life change their behavior in ways that seem to go beyond physical decline alone. They often seek out specific people, sometimes individuals they have not been close to or have not seen in some time, as if making a round of visits. They often become unusually calm and still after periods of restlessness. They often stop eating, not because they physically cannot, but because they seem to have lost interest in continuing. Some veterinarians who work with dying animals describe what they call a window, a period of hours or sometimes days before death when the animal seems to enter a different state, less reactive to its environment, less engaged with its surroundings, as if some internal process has shifted. Whether this constitutes awareness of death in any meaningful sense, or whether it is simply the neurological effect of a body entering its final shutdown, is genuinely unknown. But it is consistent enough across enough species and enough individual animals that it is very difficult to dismiss entirely. Birds add another dimension to this question. Some bird species, particularly corvids like crows and ravens, show behaviors around dead members of their species that suggest something more than simple biological response. Crows in particular have been documented holding what researchers have taken to calling funeral gatherings. Large numbers of crows assembling around a dead crow, often making loud calls and then falling into unusual silence before dispersing. Subsequent research has suggested these gatherings may serve a practical function, helping living crows learn about potential threats by investigating what killed the dead individual. But the behavior itself, the gathering, the calls, the silence, the eventual dispersal, follows a pattern consistent enough that it has been studied seriously. And some researchers believe that crow death gatherings involve something more than threat assessment, that they represent a form of social processing of loss that has functional similarities to mourning, even if the internal experience, if any, is entirely different from human grief. What does all of this evidence actually tell us? It tells us that death awareness in animals almost certainly exists on a spectrum. At one end are simple biological responses, the fish sinking, the insect releasing death chemicals, the body doing what dying bodies do with no internal experience involved at all. At the other end is something that looks, from the outside, disturbingly like what humans experience. The elephant touching the bones of a stranger with apparent reverence, the chimpanzee wasting away after losing its mother, the old dog making a final round of visits before lying down in a quiet place. Most animals probably sit somewhere between these two poles, and the honest answer to whether they know they are dying is that we genuinely do not know, because we cannot access the internal experience of another creature, human or animal, with any tool currently available to science. What we can say is that the behaviors associated with dying in many complex social animals are not random or purely mechanical. They are patterned, consistent, and in many cases appear to involve something that functions like awareness, recognition, and response to the fact that something irreversible is happening. Whether that functional awareness is accompanied by any form of subjective experience, whether there is something it feels like to be an elephant touching the bones of the dead, or a dog making its final quiet rounds, is a question that science cannot yet answer and may never be able to answer fully. It sits at the edge of what we can know, which is exactly where the most important questions always tend to sit. The stories that people have told for generations about animals going to quiet places when the end is near, about the old creature that seems to know, about the animal that says goodbye before it leaves, these stories persist because they reflect something real, not necessarily consciousness identical to our own, not necessarily an understanding of death in philosophical terms, but something, a sensitivity to the state of a failing body, a shift in behavior that looks, from the outside, like preparation, a quality of stillness that is different from sleep. Whatever is happening in those final hours and days of an animal's life, it does not look like nothing. And perhaps that is the most honest thing that can be said. We do not know what animals know about death, but the evidence suggests they know more than we assumed, and perhaps more than we are entirely comfortable with.